Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Jordan Bateman, Vice President of Communications and Marketing for the Independent Contractors and Business Association in British Columbia. His website, icba.ca. Welcome back to the show, Jordan.
Thanks for joining.
Joining us, being here.
Merry Christmas, Jim. I'm a mess already.
Kumbaya. Jordan and I would say for about the past 7 years now, we've done an annual naughty and nice list. And so we're going to do the naughty list first and save the nice list to just before Christmas. So, and you're taking it from the business perspective.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Every year Santa sends me an email and he asks me, which politicians, which governments have been naughty, and which ones have been nice to small businesses, and construction specifically. So, I send him a little list to help his elves, compile the correct, gifts to go out on Christmas Eve.
Mm-hmm. So, you have a list of naughty. Do you have it from, 1 to 10 or 10 to 1?
I have just a few naughty ones I want to highlight, although there are a few groupings here. And the first one, I think the top of the naughty list has to be the federal political parties and federal leaders for the lack of any kind of attention paid to small businesses during the federal election campaign earlier this year.
Small business provides what percentage of the jobs in Canada?
Ooh, offhand, I'm not sure, but it's a very high percentage.
It's over 70.
Yeah, I can tell you, in construction in British Columbia, the vast majority of construction companies are small businesses, probably about 80%, have fewer than 10 employees. And they really are the heart and soul of our communities, of our neighborhoods. They're the heart and soul of our economy. They really are what drives things forward. And we've seen over the past 2 years, because of COVID and other conditions, economic conditions put onto small businesses, we've seen a real hollowing out of small businesses in British Columbia. You just have to walk down your main street in your downtown area, and you'll see tons of empty windows, shops that you had relied on, places that were part of the fabric of your community, and they're gone. They've disappeared because of the unprecedented economic disaster that COVID brought. So you would think in a federal election campaign like the one we had earlier this year, especially one that, Justin Trudeau called, under the false pretense that, the economy and where we go from here after COVID, it was, the number one issue. You would think there would be lots of ideas coming from the federal politicians and parties on how to help small business. And instead we got almost nothing. Almost no attention paid to entrepreneurs, to small businesses, to the engine of the Canadian economy.
Now, what's been the consequence of the lack of attention to small business?
Well, there's been several. So, and now we can move to the second people on our naughty nice list. Let's move from federal politicians to Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, and Chrystia Freeland, the Finance Minister, specifically. What we're seeing now is rampant inflation. We are seeing costs go through the roof for consumers, but also for businesses. People forget that businesses are consumers too. They have to buy things in order to resell them, but they also need other products such as energy, fuel, property. They need all these different things in order to function. And when the cost of everything that they have to do gets more expensive, the cost of those of us buying the end product gets more expensive. And this is really a nefarious thing, and we see it all over the place. Anyone who's gone grocery shopping regularly. I do our weekly grocery shop for my family every Sunday night. I've seen an undeniable increased cost in buying groceries for the family. And it's not on the margin. It's not just a little bit. It's 15-20% more than it was even a year and a half ago. And so that means, our buying power is reduced. And for, an economy like Canada's, where so many people rely on credit cards and other debt in order to make ends meet, in order to purchase houses and other, big purchases, this is especially dangerous. And this is why, the federal politicians, they wasted such an important opportunity to talk about the economy during the election. We got hung up on things like, gun control and, issues of the second, instead of keeping our eye on the ball, which was, how is Canada going to encourage more investment? How is Canada going to create more jobs? How is Canada going to help small business owners who are reeling from this economic recession? How are we going to battle inflation? We also see it in supply chain issues. Obviously the floods and mudslides here in the Lower Mainland have really focused attention on the supply chain locally. The problem is, the supply chain was already reeling. You and I have talked many times on this podcast this year about the lack of supplies for construction companies. And again, that just drives up the price of everything else involved. So federal politicians, specifically Trudeau and Freeland, we need them to pay attention to this. We need them to get involved in this. We need them to speak out on this and tell us what their solutions are, how they're going to help small businesses, how they're going to counter inflation, how they're going to restore the supply chain.
Well, I hate to think about the first Trudeau's solution to rampant inflation back in the 70s was wage and price controls. Well, wages were certainly held down, but prices continued to go up.
Well, that's exactly it. And this is actually something that we at ICBA have been talking a lot about, is for many of our companies and company owners, they've never seen business or life in an era of rampant high inflation. So if you're around in the late 70s, early 80s, you saw it. But so many of those business leaders have retired or passed away. And there's this new generation of business leaders who have never had to handle this, never seen what this could look like. So we're actually talking internally about how do we educate our business owners in construction on what could happen, worst case scenarios, how to plan, how to protect their company and their workers. And it's tough because there aren't a lot of experts around anymore on how to survive these things. And I do wonder if that is part of the problem for Trudeau and Freeland, is, they themselves wouldn't remember that period of time. So they don't realize how scary it is. Plus they live in the Ottawa bubble. So, it's not like Prime Minister Trudeau's tracking his, month-to-month costs and seeing, oh, groceries have gone up. It's not like Krista Freeland's tracking her month-to-month costs. They have people to handle that for them. And so this disconnect happens between our political leadership and business leaders and the average public. So, we're talking a lot about how do we educate folks on this. Part of it is we have to actually talk about inflation. We've got to, find the people who were around in the late 70s, early 80s who remember it and, remember the challenges that came with it. Like my memory of those days, I was born in 76. I remember coming home one day from school. I must have been 7 or 8 years old. My dad had been laid off, and that was a, transformational, hard moment for our family. And he was without work for eight or 9 months before finding another job. And that really, that's kind of my perception of it. But you're young, right? You don't really know what it was like. You don't really know the pressures, financial pressures, my parents faced. Talk to them now, and I get a better sense of it. But we've got to pass that kind of wisdom down from the previous generation who lived through those late 70s, early 80s.
Mm-hmm. My first job was being a radio DJ when I was still in high school in 1975. I was paid. I said, yeah, the great thing back then was you could get 2 glasses of draft for 25 cents. The bad news, I was paid $400 a month.
Well, and you do hear about people who bought houses for $10,000 or $12,000 or $15,000, and we look at them like, they won the lottery. But of course, when you're only making $400 a month, that, even that is a stretch. So, yeah, there's lessons to be learned. Like I said, I think, ICBA, we're talking about with our members, encourage other business and trade associations to do the same because, buckle up, this could be very, very bad.
We'll have more with Jordan Bateman right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Jordan Bateman. Jordan, we're continuing with your naughty list. Who's number 3?
Okay, well, the next one is the provincial government, the John Horgan government, and specifically what they're doing to gut forestry in the province of British Columbia. And listeners may be like, Jordan, what does forestry have to do with construction? What are you talking about here? But, these industries are inextricably linked. And not for just the obvious reasons, which is, a lot of construction uses wood, and wood comes from forestry. But also because of, the way forestry for generations has been a driving force in our provincial economy. It's a major export. It's a major source of jobs, not just in forest-dependent communities, the obvious ones like, Campbell River or North Island or the interior of British Columbia. But, it's actually a huge driver of jobs in Surrey, in Langley, in Delta, wherever there are ports, wherever there's shipping, wherever there's wood manufacturing. Aldergrove, for example, has a big reliance on forestry jobs. So when you see a provincial government come out with a half-baked plan that they didn't bother to consult any of the forestry companies on, didn't bother to consult any forestry workers on, and didn't bother to consult any Indigenous leaders on, and they come out with this half-baked plan and, glossy images of, sunbeams floating through forest floors and, they're going to protect old growth. It all sounds great. And obviously we all love beautiful pictures of forests and sunbeams and that sort of thing, but it doesn't actually help the economy. It doesn't actually take into account what's going on the ground. And now we've had one mill already shut down, which at one point, it was a paper mill in Powell River that was, basically printing one out of every 25 newspapers in the world at one time. It's now shut down. We're told by the experts that we'll see between 12 and 15 more shut down next year. You see Indigenous groups really kind of scrambling to figure out, what it is the government's actually asking them to do, and, pushing back a little bit on the government for taking away some of their rights around forestry.
I believe forestry is perhaps one of the biggest employers of Aboriginal people.
Exactly, and many of these First Nations have agreements with companies to log. In fact, the most high-profile fight right now is going on in a place called Fairy Creek, where the Pachita want forestry. They want those logs done because it generates economic prosperity for their people, for their band, and for their workers. And so then you've got protesters there protesting against an Indigenous group wanting to use their land as they see fit. So, we live in an era where provincial government in the last term unanimously passed the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. That was supposed to shape how we deal with resource issues with First Nations going forward. They've clearly failed on that. They never bothered to consult. And, now they put artificial time limits on these First Nations governments to come up with plans and solutions and numbers. It's mind-boggling. And, I look at the industry, they are very concerned. Some of them are terrified because they see, potentially thousands of jobs disappearing. And it's easy, it's really easy when you're in the bubble in Victoria and all you hear about is Fairy Creek. It's really easy to, forestry is a dying industry, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not. It's a vibrant industry. It's one that, British Columbia has gotten better and better and better at managing. It's a renewable resource. Trees are also an important part of our greenhouse gas emission plan. So, there's lots of opportunity there, but instead we have a government that seems to be taking a very heavy-handed approach to it, and it will cost thousands of jobs, and it will cost First Nations an incredible amount of prosperity.
They gave First Nations 30 days to respond to this legislation in the middle of devastating mudslides and floods in British Columbia, which will, when all the bills are added up, will be the most costly natural disaster in Canadian history. What a great time to ask people to consult on something that blindsided them.
Yeah, exactly. It's something they should have been consulted on beforehand. But, Jim, it just seems to me like this whole thing is just about putting out nice ads by the government on I almost call it BC TV. That's how old I am. On Global BC, on City TV during Canucks games on Sportsnet, and nice radio ads for CKNW with nice foresty sounds and beautiful visuals of forests, and your provincial government is protecting old growth forests. It's really just a public relations exercise. And I get it. Like, I'm cynical and old enough. I know governments do public relations exercises all the time. That's how governments get reelected. At the same time, this particular public relations exercise is going to cost thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs. And not just in forest-dependent communities, but all over BC and in Indigenous communities. And that to me just isn't right and lands you very firmly on the naughty list.
The unions that supported the NDP in the last election were blindsided by this as well. They don't seem to be all that happy. Has John Horgan forgotten who his base is?
Well, you'd have to ask John Horgan.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what his thought is on this. I do know the NDP convention is this weekend, but they've moved it virtual, so it's not like he's going to get a lot of interaction with steel workers and forestry workers. But yeah, again, it's perplexing. It's perplexing because, that is a huge stakeholder for them. The union representing forestry workers, most of them are steel worker union. And, that's a huge, huge supporter of the NDP. It's plowed millions and millions of dollars in the NDP. A bunch of candidates, dozens of volunteers. And yet they weren't even just, consulted beforehand. This was a surprise to them. It does make you wonder, what is going on in Victoria? What are these ministers up to? And, why are they so terrified of consulting before they come out with plans? We see it in other things. We see it in how they're dealing with children, families with children with autism, taking away their supports with no consultation, and then, claiming that, no, government's going to have a better plan, but not really having any details of that plan. So we see this kind of ham-fisted behavior, and, it's not great. It's pretty disturbing for those of us who watch public policy and really believe that public input is an important part of crafting good public policy.
It looks like this forestry policy was drawn up a long time ago because the ads clearly were shot in the summertime, not during the pouring rain and snow that we've had lately when this policy was announced.
Well, I'd have to look at the ads closely, but my bet would be stock imagery. There's some stock videos. There's always, British Columbia forests are a beautiful place to film, right? So, any time of year, and there's plenty of stock footage that they can buy to put together with this. But you may be right. They may have pre-taped it. It wouldn't be a surprise. Remember John Horgan misleading the public, saying that he was still considering election, hadn't really thought about it. And then, the day he announced, a couple days later, he had pre-packaged ads that were clearly shot, 2, 3, 4 weeks before. So, it wouldn't surprise me if they were being less than, totally honest about the timeline.
John Horgan, when he was in opposition, railed against the Liberal government running what he called propaganda ads on TV. He's just as guilty. Another thing that he railed against was a proposal to charge for freedom of information requests. Well, his government is now going to charge people who want to find out information the government should tell them for free. Is that another disappointment? If you have any concerns about how government is spending money on certain things, you now have to pay them to find out where they've been wasting your money. Well,
that's exactly true, and that's another way to get on the naughty list. And We can put Minister Lisa Bear, who shepherded that particular legislation through, on that naughty list. And I'd also put Murray Rankin on that naughty list. He's another NDP cabinet minister who, up till now, his proudest accomplishment in public policy was the 1990s FOI legislation that the BC NDP brought in. He helped craft it, and it was one of the most progressive pieces in the world. And now he's, flip-flopped completely and, sticking his hand up for putting a fee on these things. Freedom of information, first of all, should be free. Second of all, governments don't own that information. The public owns that information. Taxpayers own that information. We should get access to whatever we want, whenever we want it, unless there's, very specific exemptions. But we shouldn't have to pay for it. And, at ICBA, this is a big concern. And we joined a coalition of virtually every group you could imagine, including groups that, ICBA doesn't agree with on anything else. But, we all joined together to say, look, this is wrong. We all believe freedom of information should be free. We all believe that there should be open and ample access to it. We believe that it's part of government's responsibility to the taxpayers who pay the bills to make sure they do. And still it fell on deaf ears. And again, we talked about, fake consultation. We had a minister stand up in the House literally one day, saying, we'll consult with people before we set a fee. And before she left the legislature that night, signing off on a $10 fee on a cabinet order that had been pre-prepared. So, it's very disappointing to see what's going on there.
And this fee seems to be particularly aimed at a friend of this show, Bob Mackin, who has won so many awards for his investigative journalism, and he'll tell you that, well, you think, I want to find out about mortgage records. Well, now you have to pay for that, and now freedom of information to find out how the government's wasting your money. Again, you have to pay for that. It's an obvious attempt to choke out independent investigations of the government.
Well, for sure. They loved Bob Mackin when he was FOIing the BC Liberal government. They thought he was swell. But now when he does the same in the NDP government. But look, there are things like, Mackin does file a ton of requests. There's no doubt about it. But there are things that he's filed for that should be proactively disclosed, and in some cases now are. Calendars, lobbyist registration, things like that. Those are all proactively disclosed now, thus saving dozens of FOI requests for them. But, again, ICBA, so we looked at this and said this is grossly unfair. So we signed on as a patron for next year for Bob Mackin's The Breaker.news website. And, people can contribute there. ICBA has contributed some money there to help him continue his work. Like, go and file some requests. But it shouldn't be, Bob Mackin's not doing it for Bob Mackin's sake. Bob Mackin files these requests on behalf of the public and comes up with stories that are very interesting and very important, and hold government to account. And not just the provincial government, but, various agencies and whatnot. My concern is next year we're going to see a bunch of municipalities and regional districts and, TransLink and all those other groups say, well, it's good enough for the NDP, it's good enough for us, and bring in their own fees for requests for those levels of government as well. And before you know it, government's hiding behind these little toll gates, trying to price people out of making requests.
Or you can have the Vancouver City Hall solution to requests for interviews and information. Just hire more public relations people to tell you they don't have time. I'm still waiting for Gregor Robertson, the former mayor of Vancouver, to return my calls. Apparently, in his 11 years in office, he couldn't find 10 minutes to talk to me.
Well, you're obviously very scary, Jim.
Ooh, I am scary stuff.
What a scary guy. Gregor his knees must have been knocking. I don't know. It's ridiculous, and you're exactly right. Government officials, I can't explain it. They get locked into this bubble, and they think that everyone should think or live or act like they do, and they're not willing to go and discuss their reasons or opinions or thoughts behind certain public policy decisions. And they should. They absolutely should. And, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And, when we talk about the nice list in a couple of weeks, you'll see that some of the folks on it are people who have gone above and beyond to make sure that they're open with the public and transparent about what they're doing, consulting ahead of time, and bringing in, I think, better public policy because of it.
Jordan, it's always fun chatting with you, and I'm looking forward to the nice list.
I am too. It's this was kind of the Eeyore view of public policy. Next time will be much more bouncy, much more Tigger-like as we take a look at who is nice.
My guest has been Jordan Bateman, Vice President of Communications and Marketing for the Independent Contractors and Business Association. His website, icba.ca. If you have any questions for Jordan or any of our other guests, you could send them to info@howstreet.com and we'll ask that question for you. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.